You've watched this scene more than once. The quiet engineer stays late, fixes what no one else can fix, and says nothing in meetings. A month later, the loud one gets the promotion. You see it in elections. You see it in group chats. The person with the weakest grasp somehow ends up in charge. And there's a moment that hits close to home when you realize you expected something else to happen. You expected skill to win. You expected competence to matter. That expectation is uncomfortable because it keeps failing you. Not once, but again and again. At first, it feels like bad luck, or corruption, or a broken system. But notice the pattern. Different places, different people, same outcome. And here's the part no one likes to sit with. You probably believe the same story too. That talent rises, that the smartest people are noticed, that someone, somewhere, is carefully selecting the best. It's a calming belief. It lets you relax. It lets you focus on your work and trust the structure above you. But watch what actually happens. In offices, in campaigns, in everyday conversations, pay attention to who gets listened to, not who is right, not who understands the problem, but who feels familiar, who sounds confident, who lowers tension instead of raising questions. This is where the discomfort starts, because it suggests something risky. Maybe ability is not the main signal being rewarded. Maybe it never was. Try a small experiment. Think of the last leader you followed willingly, not because you had to, because you felt comfortable doing so. Ask yourself what came first. Their skill or the feeling they gave you? This isn't a judgment, it's a test. And the result usually splits in a simple way: depth versus noise, precision versus comfort. 2,000 years ago, someone stood in a crowded square and watched this play out in real time. Not from books, not from theory, from faces, voices, reactions. He noticed that people believed they were choosing the best while consistently choosing what felt safe. He didn't call it stupidity. He didn't call it evil. He saw it as a mechanism, predictable, repeatable, quietly shaping outcomes. Look around now. How many leaders feel solid when the room goes quiet? How many only work while the lights are on? This isn't about blame. It's about recognizing the game before it recognizes you. Because if this pattern is real, it changes where leverage actually lives. And that raises a more dangerous question. If the system rewards comfort over competence, what does it punish? And where does that leave someone like you watching all of this, still assuming the old rules apply, while something else is already deciding who rises next? Watch what happens when things start to feel unstable. Not in theory, in real rooms. A company misses targets, an election turns tense, a group feels divided. The person who steps forward is rarely the sharpest mind. It's the one who calms the air, and if you're honest, you've felt that pull too. You didn't ask who could solve the hardest problem. You asked who could make the situation feel less dangerous. That's a quiet truth most people avoid because it exposes something about how we choose. Now shift the frame. Don't argue with it. Test it. Look back at the leaders you've watched rise. Not their speeches, their effect. Did things become clearer or just calmer? This is the split. Progress versus stability. Substance versus reassurance. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Power isn't awarded for being right. It's granted for reducing fear. That doesn't mean leaders are useless. It means they are selected for a different job than you were told. And that misunderstanding costs people years of effort because they keep optimizing the wrong signal. 2,000 years ago, someone stood in the middle of a crowded square and noticed the same pattern forming. Ordinary citizens debated loudly, voted proudly, and walked away. believing they had chosen excellence. He watched carefully. Again and again, the most capable men stayed on the edges, while the familiar faces moved forward. Not because of a conspiracy, because of a preference. He asked a dangerous question. Not why bad leaders rise, but why people allow it. The answer wasn't flattering. Societies don't choose to become great. They choose not to fall apart. When fear enters the room, brilliance becomes a liability. Vision stretches too far. Precision creates friction. And friction feels like risk. Think of a living body. When it's threatened, it doesn't ask for creativity. It asks for rhythm. Something steady, something predictable, something that keeps the whole thing alive. That's the role leaders end up playing. Not thinkers, not builders, stabilizers. And here's where this stops being history and starts being strategy. If leaders are chosen to preserve the system, not to transform it, then raw competence can actually work against you. That's not a moral claim. It's a design constraint. So the real question isn't why the smartest people don't lead. It's what happens to people who mistake intelligence for leverage inside a system that fears disruption. And once you see that, the next move becomes possible. But only if you're willing to rethink where influence actually comes from. Watch what happens when someone moves too fast. In a meeting, in a system, in a culture. The room tightens, eyes drift, jokes start. The idea isn't attacked directly, it's quietly pushed aside. You've seen this up close, maybe you've felt it yourself. The moment you realize your thinking was a step ahead and instead of interest, you met resistance. Not anger. Something colder. Here's the uncomfortable part. It's not because the idea was wrong. It's because it was destabilizing. People don't reject what they can't understand. They reject what threatens their sense of footing. And the system reacts the same way a body does when it feels shock. It slows the pulse. It searches for balance. So change the lens. Don't moralize it. Run an experiment. Watch who advances when things feel fragile, not who sees farthest, who moves slow enough to be trusted. This is the split. Speed versus safety, vision versus comfort. And comfort almost always wins when fear is nearby. Aristotle noticed this long before modern institutions existed. He wasn't impressed by brilliance alone. He watched how crowds behaved when choices actually mattered, when stakes were real. He saw that societies don't follow those who stretch them. They follow those who resemble them. Leaders rise not because they elevate people, but because they reassure them. That's why the system favors familiar faces. Voices that echo what the group already believes, promises that sound like continuity, not rupture. It's not stupidity, it's self-preservation. And once you accept that, something sharp comes into focus. The system isn't failing when it avoids visionaries. It's protecting itself. You see the same pattern everywhere. In companies where the agreeable manager is chosen over the difficult genius. In politics where performance beats precision. In small groups where volume replaces judgment. It feels like decay. But it's design. And here's where the tension escalates. If power is selected for stability, not excellence, then brilliance becomes a liability in leadership races. Not because it lacks value, but because it creates imbalance. That's a hard truth to swallow, especially if you've spent years refining skill instead of presence. So where does that leave the people who actually see clearly? The ones who build, discover, solve? Aristotle had an answer, but it wasn't comforting. He believed the highest aim of a human life wasn't influence or control. It was a different pursuit altogether. One that often pulls capable people away from crowds, not toward them. Think about the sharpest people you know, the ones absorbed in their craft, the engineer lost in problems no one else wants, The scientist chasing questions with no applause attached. Notice where they aren't. And that opens a final dangerous loop. If the system resists brilliance at the top, and if the most capable often step away from power by instinct, then leadership and excellence may be drifting in opposite directions. If that's true, the real leverage might exist somewhere else entirely. And that's the part most people never get to. Picture someone alone late at night, still working, not because anyone is watching, but because the work pulls them in. An artist adjusting a detail no one asked for. An engineer fixing a flaw that would never be noticed. You recognize that drive? Or maybe you envy it. It isn't about control, it's about mastery. And here's the first quiet sting. That kind of focus rarely points toward leadership. Shift the angle for a moment. Don't judge it. Test it. Watch where the most capable people spend their time. Not in meetings, not building alliances. They're learning, building, they're refining. While others trade favors and impressions, they trade hours for progress. This is the split. Depth versus display. Essential work versus noise. Now comes the uncomfortable part. When a system starts rewarding what feels familiar, the people who operate on substance alone begin to fade from view. Not because they failed, because they opt out. Some disappear into labs and workshops. And some build things before the world is ready to see them. They choose the work over the stage. And that choice quietly removes them from contention. But there's another layer, harder to admit. The sharpest minds are often difficult to follow. They see what others can't. They move faster than the group. They question rules everyone else depends on to feel stable. Being around them creates tension, not because they are wrong, but because they expose limits. Watch how groups react to that. Ideas get labeled unrealistic. Solutions feel threatening. The person starts to sound not like us. No attack, just distance. The system doesn't need to reject them loudly. It filters them out slowly. You see it at work. The developer who solves the hardest problems never becomes CEO. Not from lack of skill, but from lack of interest in perception games. She fixes systems. Others manage feelings. Guess which path leads upward? You see it in politics. The one who speaks plainly loses to the one who soothes. Truth creates friction. Comfort creates loyalty. The crowd doesn't choose challenge, it chooses reflection. Even in small circles, the pattern repeats. The thoughtful voice waits. The loud one leads. And everyone calls it natural. So here's the tension you're left with. If excellence pulls people away from power and power selects against excellence, then something important is happening offstage. The real question isn't why the best rarely lead, it's where their influence actually goes instead. And what that means for anyone trying to decide which game they're really playing. Watch it closely the next time someone sharp enters the room. Not aggressive, just ahead. You'll see the shift. Conversations slow. Jokes appear. The group gently pulls back. You've felt this before. Maybe when you explained something too clearly, or moved too fast. The reaction wasn't anger, it was distance, and that's the first clue. It looks like disorder from the outside. But try a different lens. Treat it like a test. Track who stays visible and who quietly fades. Not over days, over years. The ones who fit keep moving. The ones who disrupt get smoothed out or pushed aside. This isn't chaos, it's selection. Comfort versus friction. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Not every intelligent person is rejected. Some rise very high. So the filter isn't intelligence itself, it's how that intelligence is used. Watch the ones who make it. They simplify, they slow down, they choose words carefully, they leave parts of their thinking unspoken. not because they can't say it, but because they know what would happen if they did. This is the trade most people don't see. To lead, even the sharpest minds have to compress themselves. They translate depth into something safe. They become symbols instead of sources, and that requires restraint, a kind of self-editing. Now the sting. Many brilliant people won't do that, not out of pride, out of principle. They value accuracy over acceptance, truth over influence. They stay loyal to the work instead of the crowd. And that choice has a cost, not immediate. Slow, quiet. Run the experiment again, look at who climbs. Often it's not the deepest thinker, it's the most adaptable. The one who can read the room, the one who knows when to hide an edge. Sometimes that person is also capable, sometimes they aren't. The system doesn't care, it rewards what it can absorb. This is why the pattern repeats. In offices, in politics, in communities. The quiet genius gets passed over, the visionary gets labeled difficult. The person who speaks plainly gets sidelined. Someone easier steps forward. It feels wrong when you watch it, like a mistake, like something precious was missed. But here's the harder frame. The system isn't trying to be fair, it's trying to remain stable, like a body rejecting what it can't digest. When faced with someone too far ahead, most people don't lean in, they retreat. Safety beats potential, familiar beats extraordinary. Once you see this, another question opens up. If influence requires self-limiting and excellence resists it, then power and truth may not live in the same place. And if that's true, the real decision isn't whether the system is broken. It's which role you're actually optimizing for and what you're willing to trade when the moment arrives. Notice who leaves the room first, not after losing, after understanding the rules. Some people don't get pushed out. They step back quietly, not from fear, but from refusal. A refusal to spend their lives polishing surfaces while the core stays untouched. If that sounds familiar, it should. Change the frame. Treat this like a field test. Watch who stays in the game long enough to rise. Not who is best, who fits. That difference is subtle, and once you see it, it's hard to ignore. Because the system isn't built to reward depth, it's built to reduce friction. Substance versus appearance. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most of us like to think decisions are made through reason, evidence, clear thinking, but look closer at how people actually move, what convinces them, what calms them. Logic opens the door, maybe. Emotion walks them through it. Familiarity tells them it's safe to stay. Run the experiment again. Pay attention to who gets followed. The one who explains clearly or the one who makes people feel understood? The one who challenges assumptions or the one who confirms them? Freedom versus comfort. Comfort usually wins without a fight. This isn't theory, you see it every day. At work, the friendly manager climbs while the quiet expert carries the real weight. In elections, the polished speaker wins while the careful thinker disappears. Online entertainers gather millions, while the people creating real breakthroughs stay invisible. It looks irrational. It feels unfair, but here's the shift. If your goal is to keep the system stable, not to push it forward, these outcomes start to make sense. A crowd, doesn't want to feel outpaced. It doesn't want to be corrected. It wants recognition, reflection, reassurance that nothing essential needs to change. That's why leaders are chosen less for what they know and more for what they signal. Safety, belonging, continuity. They don't raise the temperature. They regulate it. And this is where the tension tightens. If societies select for comfort and many capable people refuse to perform comfort, then withdrawal becomes a strategy, not a failure. The most skilled step away. The most adaptable step in. And the pattern locks itself in place. So the paradox opens wider. If emotion moves crowds and familiarity builds trust, where does that leave truth? Where does it leave the people who won't trade clarity for applause? Once you see this, the real question isn't why the system looks the way it does. It's where influence actually lives, and whether you're aiming for it or something else entirely. Watch how people react when someone speaks a little too clearly. Not loudly, clearly. The room shifts, faces tighten. The idea lands, but instead of curiosity, there's distance. You felt that moment yourself. When your thinking moved ahead, and suddenly you felt less welcome, not more. That's the first signal. Capability doesn't always attract. It separates. Here's the uncomfortable part. The more you understand, the less relatable you often appear. The sharper the idea, the more threatening it feels to those who can't follow it. Not because they're stupid, because difference feels risky. So try a small experiment. Look at who gets pushed forward and who quietly fades. It's rarely the outlier. It's the familiar, essential versus safe. Safe usually wins. This isn't random. Think of any group as a living thing, a team, a family, a company. When something feels foreign, the instinct isn't to study it, it's to reject it, even if that thing could make the whole system stronger. Progress versus survival. Survival doesn't negotiate. Modern psychology didn't discover this. It just confirmed it. Humans are wired for belonging. Long before comfort, belonging meant staying alive. Being accepted kept you fed. Being cast out meant danger. That instinct didn't disappear. It just changed clothes. So when people choose leaders, they aren't scanning for competence. They're scanning for signals. Who feels like one of us? Who lowers the threat level? This is where the illusion breaks. The people in power who seem shallow or unqualified aren't accidents, they're adaptations. They know how to read a room. They know how to echo beliefs instead of challenging them. They don't push, they reassure. They perform certainty even when there's nothing underneath. And strangely, that works. Look closer and you'll see it. These leaders function like mirrors. They reflect fears back as confidence, doubts back as slogans, desires back as promises. The crowd doesn't feel led, it feels recognized. And recognition feels safer than truth. That's why the cycle keeps repeating. A visionary steps forward. Someone else, more likable, more familiar, takes the spotlight. The system congratulates itself and moves on. Meanwhile, the person who could have changed the direction steps aside or gets filtered out without a fight. You can see the cost everywhere. Companies where nothing new survives, governments that chase approval instead of solutions, cultures that trade truth for entertainment because discomfort doesn't convert as well as dopamine. It feels like decline, like failure. But here's the harder frame. This isn't the system breaking. This is the system doing exactly what it was built to do. When survival is the priority, comfort beats brilliance. Familiarity beats progress. Every time. And once you see that, a sharper question opens. If capability pushes you out and familiarity pulls others up, then where does real leverage actually live? And what happens if you stop trying to win the wrong game altogether? Watch the reaction when someone radical gets close to the top. Not reckless, just faster than the rest. The air changes, support thins. Suddenly the word unrealistic appears. You've seen this play out. Maybe you've even felt relief when that person didn't make it. That relief is the clue. Here's the uncomfortable shift. When you see someone unqualified in power, it feels like failure, like the system glitched. But try a different test. Assume it worked exactly as intended. Stability versus transformation. Stability keeps winning. That thought lands hard because it rewrites what power actually is. It's not a reward for excellence. It's a filter for compatibility. The people at the top aren't there because they're the best thinkers. They're there because they perform the role everyone recognizes. Once you see that, patterns stop looking random. Cycles stop looking accidental. Run the experiment through history, different eras, different technologies, same outcome. Advancement changes, selection doesn't. The system doesn't ask who sees farthest. It asks who fits without tearing the fabric. At first, this sounds like a mistake, like society is sabotaging itself, but look closer. Imagine millions of people pulling in different directions, different fears, different needs, different speeds. Now put someone too far ahead at the center, someone who moves before others are ready. The structure strains, cracks form, chaos becomes possible. So the system does something quiet. It chooses a buffer, someone who absorbs shock instead of creating it, someone who smooths edges, someone who turns complexity into something people can live with. Comfort versus progress. Comfort gets the job. This is where the label idiot misses the point. These leaders aren't there to innovate. They're there to calm, to reassure, to signal familiarity. They stand still while others panic. They repeat what people already believe. They promise safety even when no one truly controls the outcome. And that's why they're chosen. Not because they lead forward, but because they keep things from breaking apart. The system prefers continuity over potential, always has. Once you accept this, the world starts to look different, less confusing, more precise. The real question isn't why power looks shallow. It's where transformation is allowed to happen at all. And if it's not at the top, then where does it actually begin? Watch a leader step in front of a crowd during a crisis. The words are simple, the tone is calm. Nothing precise is promised. Yet people relax. You can feel it. The tension drops. That reaction matters more than the plan itself. And if you're honest, you've been pulled by it too. Shift the frame for a second. Don't ask who is deciding. Ask what the scene is doing to the crowd. What it gives them is not direction, but a feeling, control, or at least the appearance of it. That's the first crack in the story we tell ourselves. 2,000 years ago, this was already visible. In Athens, leaders weren't chosen to redesign society. They were chosen to embody it, to stand there and look like the people believed power was still theirs. The leader wasn't the builder. He was the mirror. Run the same test today. In companies, the CEO isn't always the one inventing the future. They're the face people recognize, the voice employees trust. Somewhere behind them, decisions are made quietly, carefully, without applause. Essential work versus visible work. In politics, the pattern sharpens. The person at the podium speaks, smiles, takes questions, but the real pressure moves elsewhere. Advisors, donors, groups with no cameras on them. The figure in front absorbs attention while the structure behind them shifts direction. Even in small circles, you can see it. The leader isn't always the planner. They're the one who keeps everyone aligned. The one people listen to, the one who makes disagreement feel manageable. Someone else often pulls the threads. Here's the uncomfortable part. The people we call fools in power are not always steering the system. Often they're protecting it. They catch anger, they take blame, they hold the spotlight so others can work in the dark. Shields, not engines. This isn't incompetence, it's placement. Aristotle understood that politics wasn't built to reward truth or brilliance first. It was built to keep order. And sometimes the best way to do that is to put someone harmless looking at the front. Someone who calms the crowd, while real decisions happen elsewhere. That realization stings because it clashes with what we want to believe. We want fairness. We want merit. We want to think power goes to those who earn it. But the system doesn't optimize for fairness, it optimizes for survival. Survival needs symbols, figures who hold things together, even if they aren't the ones doing the stitching. And yes, that comes at a cost. Progress slows, innovation waits, talent stays invisible. But from the perspective of the group, the trade feels rational. Stability now beats potential later. Because a system that falls apart never gets the chance to use its best ideas anyway. Once you see this, another question opens. If real power often hides behind symbols, then chasing the stage might be the wrong move entirely. So where does influence actually live? And what kind of person is willing to operate there? Watch how a system reacts when pressure rises, not with brilliance, with calm. Someone steps forward, says the right words, slows the panic. You might roll your eyes at them, call them unqualified. But notice what actually happens. The noise drops. People keep moving. That's not failure, that's function. Try a different experiment. Stop looking at leaders as people. Look at them as roles, as parts in a larger machine. Some push forward, some shake things up, and some exist for one reason only, to keep the rhythm steady so everything else doesn't tear itself apart. Essential versus disruptive. The system almost always protects the first. Here's the uncomfortable turn. The figures we mock as idiots in power may not be mistakes at all. They may be the adhesive, the ones absorbing pressure so the structure doesn't crack. That doesn't mean they move us forward. It means they keep us from falling. But if that's true, then a sharper question opens. If the person on stage isn't really driving, who is? Hold that thought. Watch a press conference, a shareholder meeting, a town hall. The leader speaks. Confidence is projected. The crowd relaxes. But listen carefully. The language is narrow, rehearsed, safe. That's because the lines were written elsewhere. This pattern isn't new. Even in ancient cities, leaders were boxed in by laws, money, traditions, and expectations they didn't control. Their authority was borrowed, not owned. 2,000 years later, the setup is cleaner, not different. Boards guide CEOs, donors bend policy, interest groups apply quiet pressure. In small organizations, the face you see often announces decisions already made behind doors you'll never enter. Actors rotate. The stage updates, the script stays. And this is where the illusion tightens. We think we choose leaders. We think they steer the future. But most of the time, they symbolize control more than they exercise it. That realization is unsettling because it strips away comfort. If leaders are functions and symbols, not drivers, then attention itself has been misplaced. And that raises a dangerous question. If real power doesn't sit where we're taught to look, where does it actually operate? And what kind of person is willing to work there, unseen, while the crowd applauds someone else? Watch the pattern, not the person. The system doesn't reward those who write the rules. It rewards those who fit the role already waiting to be filled. So the next time you see someone at the top who seems out of place, pause. Ask yourself something sharper. Are they actually in control, or are they performing a function you don't see yet? That question lands close because it turns the spotlight away from them and toward the stage itself. If the figure in front is an actor, then someone else is holding the pen. And that thought creates pressure because it suggests you've been watching the wrong layer all along. Try a small experiment. Stop listening to what leaders promise. Watch what never changes when they come and go. The language shifts, the faces rotate, the direction stays familiar. Essential versus visible. The visible absorbs attention. The essential stays quiet. Here's the uncomfortable turn. If most power operates off stage, then trusting the performance is the safest move. It's also the easiest. You follow the script, you accept the roles, you let the show run. Freedom versus comfort. Comfort asks nothing from you. But there's another option. You can step closer to the curtain. Not to tear it down, just to look behind it. To notice how decisions form, how incentives shape outcomes, how symbols keep people calm while systems keep moving. This isn't rebellion, it's clarity. And clarity has a cost. Once you see the machinery, you can't unsee it. You stop asking why certain people rise. That question loses power. A more dangerous one replaces it. Who gains when they do? That question doesn't end cleanly. It opens outward, into economics, into culture, into your own choices. Because if the game rewards performance over authorship, then everyone has to decide where they stand. On the stage or near the script. This isn't about cynicism. It's about orientation, about choosing where to put your attention. Because the patterns shaping your life don't announce themselves. They repeat quietly until someone finally looks at the right level. So consider this an invitation, not a conclusion. Do you think these leaders appear by chance or by design? And if the design is real, what does that change about where you aim next?